Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Sunday Supplement. Coming up on today's show, Pep's protest. Manchester City's manager claims he could only name 6 subs at Burnley because his best players are being kicked out of the game. Another new era begins at Arsenal. Is Aubameyang the answer for Arsene Wenger? And it's all gone quiet over there. Mourinho, he claims you could hear a pin drop at the Theatre of Dreams during their 2-0 victory over Huddersfield yesterday. Making a big noise this morning, Sam Wallace is the chief football writer at the Daily Telegraph. Jonathan Liew is the chief sports writer with the Independent. And John Cross is the chief football writer at the Daily Mirror. Morning, guys. Good to see you as ever. Don't forget you can tweet the show at Sunday Sup. The best will appear on your screen over the next 90 minutes. Let's have a look at some of the papers then. Back page of the Sun this morning. You're a joke, Pep. This is Red Nev, Sky Sports Nev, Gary Neville, talking about Pep Guardiola's decision to name 6 substitutes on the bench yesterday for their draw at Turf Moor against Burnley. We're coming straight onto that this morning. We'll talk a little bit about the game as well. It ain't over. That's the Daily Star this morning, talking about the 1-1 draw yesterday. The 13 points clear still. Manchester United winning yesterday. Sam saw that game at Old Trafford. Conte, is he really on the brink? The Daily Express, Sunday Express say Antonio Conte will be sacked if Chelsea lose at Watford at Vicarage Road tomorrow night. Remarkable story, that one. Conte on the attack, though, in the Mail on Sunday this morning. Bungled, talking about the transfer activity at Chelsea. He's got through £250 million since they won the title at the end of last season, and it's still not enough. Will he be in charge on February the 25th, though? The back page of the Sunday People this morning, face-off. He's itching to get at Jose Mourinho, according to Steve Bates. That clash scheduled for the 25th of March. It's the same day as the Carabao Cup final. 25th of February, rather, between Manchester City and Arsenal. On a more sombre note, a sombre message from Sir Bobby Charlton. His Munich letter yesterday to officials and supporters, manager and coaching staff at Manchester United on the 60th anniversary of the Munich air disaster. Front page of the Sunday Times this morning. Sam was at the game. Jose slamming the quiet Manchester United fans during that 2-0 victory over Huddersfield yesterday. Alexis Sanchez, he's off the mark, missed a penalty, but he scored the tap-in to score his first goal for Manchester United. Crossy was at the Emirates yesterday. We'll come on to Arsenal in part 2. Is this the man to save Arsenal and Arsene Wenger? Sweet Pea, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang scoring yesterday in that handsome victory over Everton. OK, let's move on, though. Let's get straight on to Manchester City, Sam, and Pep Guardiola. And the decision yesterday to name 6 substitutes. Have to say, when I first heard the news yesterday, I thought it was because he'd missed out on Riyad Mahrez. But beyond that, I think the logical conclusion is it's because of the number of injuries that that Manchester City have got at the moment to a number of their key players. Was he right to name 6 substitutes? Was he within his rights to do it?
Oh, well, he's certainly within his rights to do it. I think it angers people because City are a team with great resources. They've got this massive squad of development players as well, very expensively assembled. I have to say that I think 7 substitutes is a bit of a joke anyway. I think that's too many. I think it's a reflection of the wealth of our game, of that managers aren't forced to make difficult decisions. They can just put as many as they want on the bench. So I have to say that I wasn't as outraged as clearly some people are about it. There are some mitigating factors. They had an under-23s game the night before in Swansea. He felt the players were better used in that. Also, he's got 7 injuries to his first team squad. And I think, in the end, Brahim Diaz did actually come on in the game, didn't he? One of the teenagers. So I don't quite share the anger that some people have got with it. I think there are more important things. I think there were more challenges, for example, yesterday. In the game that I was at Old Trafford, there was a particularly bad challenge on Scott McTominay. Those are the sort of things that I would find more unsettling. I think maybe the response is partly because of people see City as a club which has no limits on its spending, that can buy whoever they like and can fix any problem, and so to do that, and as Gary Neville said, not to give a young player a chance seems to be what's upset people. All I would say is that, obviously Gary Neville knows better than us as an ex-pro what experience a young player can gain from being on the bench, but it strikes me that Pep Guardiola did bring a teenager on. I mean, he did, even in a game that was fairly tight, he did bring an 18-year-old on. So it's not like he's against that, but Gary Neville thinks that the experience of the day would have been good for a young player. I still think that when we judge City on whether they're serious about bringing homegrown players through, let's look at it in the long term. Will they really get Diaz into the first team? Will Phil Foden, who's currently injured, be a first-team player one day? Those are the issues that in the long term that I would judge them on.
OK, we'll come back to whether those youth team players will get into that first team at some stage in a moment. Did in your view, did Guardiola have a right to protest yesterday, John? Was it a protest in your view? Bearing in mind this seems to have built up a bit of a head of steam in the week, going back to last weekend's FA Cup victory at Cardiff, when Leroy Sané got the injury that rules him out for probably 6 or 7 weeks.
Well, it's his team, and essentially he can do what he likes with it. He can name as many substitutes as he wants. I can kind of see where Gary Neville's coming from. I understand, that it's the possibility of an opportunity for a young player, but you have to give these things out on merit. It's the bench of a Premier League team in a Premier League game. It's not. Does it actually do a young player any good just to sit there and know that he's there essentially to make up the numbers? It's like a kind of competition winner who's won a place to be on a Premier League bench. It's not the Make-A-Wish Foundation, it's the Premier League.
But their argument is, if you're Gary Neville's argument and ex-pros' arguments is, if you're the next cab off the rank in the reserve team, under 23 team, youth team, whatever the next team is in succession, is that you get that opportunity, that it opens your eyes up to what it's like to be a first-team player, to be in the environment, to be with the first-team players, to travel with them, to stay in the hotel, and get a better understanding of what it takes to become a Manchester City first-team player. Yeah,
they get a lot of that anyway. The integration between the youth teams and the first team at City is, by all accounts, pretty good. I just don't think you need to... It smacks of tokenism slightly if you're just taking a young player along for the ride. It's almost kind of an insult to their talent. If you're knackered and you're not going to play, if you're not got a chance of playing in the game, what's the point?
Crossy, help me out here. The first two guests have said he's absolutely within his rights, and they're not. If the youth team players aren't good enough or the under-23s aren't good enough to be on the bench, well, why put them there?
Yeah, well, I wish I could be angry about it, but I'm not either. Sorry. But I tell you what, I don't feel that Guardiola's stance was about Mahrez at all. I totally feel that it was about the injuries and a protest about the injuries, really. And I think, personally, he's well within his rights to do that. I do think some of the challenges on Man City players in the last few weeks have been scandalous. I do think that we need to have a little look at it and say... I thought it was remarkable this week that Alan Pardew admitted that basically he almost suggested that the only way to stop City was to foul them, and that basically he completely fessed up and said that actually my players deserve those bookings and the punishments that they received. The challenge that Matty Phillips put in, I think, was a shocker, wasn't it? It should have been red rather than yellow, and Pardew actually sympathised with the booking and said, the right to do so. Is that the right call then to make the protest for the bench, and is he cutting off his nose to spite his face, and then also really ostracising sort of one of the youngsters who might have seen it as an opportunity? I don't actually think so, because rather like Johnny, I do feel that he would the young player have actually got on? Would he have experienced that? And people say about being around the sort of the first team environment, and would that have done him any good? I'm not completely convinced that it would have done, really. It would have sort of built up his hopes and then kind of given him a little bit of a flavour of it. But I think actually, bearing in mind they had a development game the night before, I do actually think that the player would have been better served getting 90 minutes in that game. And at the moment, City have got a lot of injuries, and they are carrying a lot of injuries.
Are they being targeted? They're so good, nobody can touch them, nobody can catch them, certainly in the Premier League.
They are.
Are they being targeted?
They are. And I feel that
so premeditated managers in the build-up to matches, whether that's in training, in preparation for the game, tactically, or in the dressing room, are saying, go and nail a few.
I don't know if it's that in the team talks. I suspect it is with some, but not with all. But I think that for some of the players, it's almost a subconscious effect that you have, saying that guy's flying past me, whether it be Silva, Sterling. You can't get near them, they're that good. And basically, at the moment, the only way is to chop them down. You saw that with West Brom, I felt, this week. I think that down the years, when you've got the team that is so much better than everyone else, it's not unique to City because it's happened before. I think whether that be with, Man United, or whether that be sort of Chelsea under Mourinho, whether that be Arsenal under Wenger when they were the best team in the country, that they were targeted. Look at Man United when Arsenal were threatening to remove them from their crown. Look at the brutalisation of the Arsenal players at Old Trafford when they lost the unbeaten run. You know, look at sort of the way that maybe the attacking players were targeted at Chelsea with Joe Carwills and Robben and the like. I mean, look at the amount of injuries that Robben had when he was at Chelsea. You get the best team in the land, and they are so good. The only way to stop them is to foul them. And I feel at the moment that Man City, Pep's 100% right, and we need to have a little bit deeper and say, actually, we need to offer a little bit more protection. They're not prima donnas, and I actually feel that at the moment it's been completely unfair on the way that City have been treated. We should be celebrating City as the best team in the country. They are absolutely magnificent. They can go and win the Champions League, but they can't win the Champions League and do a really good thing for the Premier League if they're being cut off at the knees and getting fouled each and every week. It's wrong, and basically the referees, I think we've got a poor selection of referees. We've got 2 or 3 good referees. The rest are very average, and we've got that coupled with people trying to stop Man City by resorting to dirty tricks, in my view.
John, have we got a decision to make on which direction we want the sport to take? Because we grew up with a contact sport. Roy Hodgson talked a few weeks ago about the improvement in playing services, in training facilities, and it's changed the way that the game is played. But are we in danger of turning it into a non-contact sport?
Well, I think there definitely needs to be a conversation about fouling, cynical fouling of the sort that we've seen against Manchester City and a lot of other clubs. I think City are getting targeted, but I think so is everybody else. If you're a player on the counter-attack with the ball, such as the importance of the counter-attack these days, that clearly the punishment for deliberately fouling somebody outside of your own penalty area is not deterring players. We're seeing far too many players having, basically taken the yellow card, taken the free kick for the team, and I think that's what we need to have a conversation about. It's not about City. It's not about some vendetta against City because you see terrible tackles in every game in the Premier League. So we can have a proper discussion about deliberate fouling in the game. And by the way, I think City are 5th in terms of red cards this season and 9th in terms of yellow cards. They're not exempt from this discussion at all.
I think there's an interesting wider debate about if I dare I say, the inequalities in our game. So there's been quite a lot of discussion about possession counts this season, that for the first time since stats have begun, we've seen possession counts consistently leap into 70%. And Wenger's been talking about it this week. Crossy, we were there, weren't we? Where he talked about the 70-30 league. So there's just a few teams that can, City obviously being the greatest example, that control 70% of possession regularly in games. And I just thinking about it, it feels sometimes a bit like when you have a society where there's a lot of inequality and crime rises. And I feel that teams are, because they have so little of the ball against City, that they adopt these very aggressive tactics because that's basically the only way to stop them. They know that they have to be able to control them, let them have the ball, but control them when they do. I think when managers set up to play against City and other teams, but mainly City, they walk a very fine line. They are obviously asking their players to be aggressive. They have to make those tackles on the edge of their box because otherwise City are through them and it's going to be a goal. But they have to think very carefully about what they're saying to their players, because you see with Joe Bennett's tackle on Leroy Sané, I mean that's completely the wrong side of the line. And in fairness to Bennett, he did apologise and he sounded genuinely remorseful. But when you're being asked to do a certain job, when you're being told these players are so much better than you, you are going to have to be aggressive, then it takes a lot in the heat of the moment to be able to judge that level of aggression and get it right, tackle after tackle after tackle. And going back to my original point, I do feel that when a team is so dominant, then I think there are chances that the other side can lose that judgment. They can lose their minds in the heat of the moment. I'm not blaming the side for being over dominant, but I think it definitely is a consequence of that inequality.
How influential is Guardiola on English football, Crossy? Has he got an increasing influence in terms of the balance of power? Because he wants a meeting with Mike Riley, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Then if we accept that this was, I think we agree that it was some form of protest. Yes, he wants to change the way that the game's played. He doesn't like tackling. One of his first challenges as a Barcelona first-team player, by the way, was a tackle. But he doesn't like tackling, doesn't encourage it in his side. Is he trying to shape English football himself?
Well, he probably is for his own benefit and for Man City's benefit. But it was quite interesting, wasn't it? In his post-match interview yesterday, he was sort of saying, "Do you actually like English football?" And he absolutely insisted that he did, and he enjoyed the very British feel, as he referred to it, of going to Burnley and playing in that atmosphere. I just don't think he's trying to. I don't think he's trying to make a revolution in English football. He is trying to change English football for his own benefit and for Man City's benefit. And I can understand why he's doing that, and that's not a criticism of him, because at the moment, I've been to games recently where, I mean, did Palace Man City between Christmas and New Year, and the challenges were outrageous, weren't they? I mean, it was punching, wasn't it, on De Bruyne? I mean, God blimey, how De Bruyne's coming out of that? I just don't. I can't begin to understand how he could play the following game. And then we saw sort of Tottenham go to Man City. The shocking challenges, going in there from Kane and Ali. I mean, you can understand why Guardiola is upset. And, I mean, I thought the Sun yesterday did a sort of detailing, I think, 9 horrendous challenges. And so they're all being stored up there, aren't they, and sort of then being trotted out. And, Martin Blackburn sort of detailed them in procession, didn't he? And I can understand why Guardiola is trying to make a change there.
Haven't all managers always done that? I mean, Fergie used to do it about Ronaldo all the time. He used to talk about his treatment. It was a theme, a constant theme of his sort of post-match press conferences. Yeah,
they probably have. And then Wenger used to go on about kind of the way that Reyes was targeted, particularly that Old Trafford game, sort of talk about. So they all do it, and that's why I think it's a phase almost. And I don't think he is trying to change the world, and I don't think he is trying to change English football. I don't think he'd be naive enough to think that he can completely revolutionise it and take away the tackle. I mean, some of the City players are prepared to tackle. I mean, Fernandinho can be an aggressive player. Otamendi certainly can't he? And so I don't think he's trying to change it, for the good. But I think that City have sort of kind of had a little bit of unfair stick this week. I still think they're by far and away the best team. They're being sort of killed over Mahrez to a degree which I can't begin to understand. I mean...
Killed in what sense?
Well, I just feel that to my mind, Mahrez was going to be a summer target for them, and then Sane gets injured on the Sunday, and they say, OK, we'll have a go for Mahrez this window.
They claim that was never the case. They say that it was... City sources would say that he was when Sanchez fell through. That was it. They were after Mahrez.
Well, that's fine, but it just felt to me that basically Mahrez was on the back burner for the summer, and then that preempted that sort of was the precursor really for them going for Mahrez. That's what it feels like to me, and I feel sure that they will go back for Mahrez in the summer, and I just feel that the fallout from Mahrez isn't Man City's fault. They are perfectly entitled to go and bid for any player they want. It's down to Mahrez, then, who I think has acted shockingly and disrespectfully towards Leicester. Now, Leicester fans will ever welcome him back is beyond a joke. The one thing I would say is if I'm Man City and Pep Guardiola and the transfer team now, I'll be looking at and say, is he the right sort of character? If he goes AWOL, I mean, who's advising him there? I mean, it's absolutely shocking on a sort of a personal level, I think, and it would put me off. And I would run a million miles from him in the summer, to be honest.
Would you run a million miles from him?
Well, the interesting thing
would you run a million miles for him?
Well, I suppose if I ran a million miles from Mahrez, he'd catch me pretty quickly. But nobody wants to see a player going AWOL, but the interesting thing about Mahrez is he's kind of done it the right way in a way. He had a lot of interest last summer and the previous summer. He could have upped sticks and left, and he could have spent the last 2 years sulking. And in fact, he's knuckled down this season and played some really good stuff for Leicester. He's been a key reason why they're so high in the league. And so, if he feels like a kind of a promise has been broken, or some sort of understanding has been reneged on, then you can kind of understand why he's reacted in the way he had, which is clearly a very emotional way. Nobody wants to see players going on strike, but it's sort of one of the options open to him.
Yeah, sure. OK, we'll see what happens with Riyad Mahrez in the coming days. Didn't play for Leicester again yesterday. OK, next up, we'll talk Arsenal. The new era. It's begun. We'll talk about them next. Right, I've got a match report here. Tell me which year it was, which month and which game. This is the intro. A new era dawned at the Emirates in the gathering gloom of North London yesterday.
Or 2016, 2015, 2014. Yeah, take your pick, basically.
You were there yesterday, though. Is it a new era?
Well, it's got to be. That's the point.
OK,
that's
it's got to be, or what?
Well, we've been chatting about this week, haven't we, basically? And
I mean, I've conversation. It's about to become an on-the-record conversation. Yeah.
No, I've written in pieces this week where I think that basically Wenger's future and Wenger's sort of stay at Arsenal will be up for discussion in the summer. He's obviously got a 2-year contract which he signed last year.
Why do you think he's got a 2-year contract? Why do you think that?
Well, I do think it might have been slightly a ploy. I mean, Gary Neville. We obviously derided in the last part, but sort of obviously talking a great deal of sense on the debate on Friday night. Basically made this point, and I think he's probably right, is that basically it was almost a bit of a kind of a disguise by Arsenal saying take away the kind of feeling that they had last season, that this was the end for Arsene Wenger, and every press conference, every discussion was dominated, are you going to stay or go? And so you'd kind of take away that heat. And so to give him a 2-year contract and then basically he could go at the end of the first year. I think that Arsenal, if their season fades away and they finish 6th, 30 points behind, they lose the League Cup final.
30 points behind what, 4th or 1st?
Well, it could be either at this rate. You just don't know what you're going to get. I mean, I don't know how you can go from Swansea on Tuesday, which was horrendous. I mean, the standard of defending was Sunday League.
And Europe both.
And then to the game against Everton when they were absolutely mesmerising in that first half. They were brilliant. Mkhitaryan was out of this world. Aubameyang has given them pace and movement. Ozil is fabulous at the moment when he's on song. They've signed him to a new contract and everything in the garden is rosy. But it's just whether they can salvage this season. And I think if you are seeing signs of an upturn, if they maybe win that League Cup final, if they get back into the top 4, win the Europa League and get back into the Champions League, then I've no doubt that Wenger, who will never leave of his own accord, there's no chance of that happening, then fine, he will see out the final year of his contract, no problem. But I think if this season descends into a disappointment, then I think that there's every chance he could go this summer. I don't think anything is set in stone.
Sure.
But I do think what we are witnessing is one last roll of the dice from Wenger. He's got in players that he really likes. I'm not convinced.
Who signed them? Whose signings are they? Are they his?
Yeah,
Mkhitaryan and Aubameyang. Are his signings? And the decision to let Giroud go to Chelsea, is that Wenger's decision?
I think he did it with a heavy heart. I think that basically he wouldn't. Yeah, I think ultimately he still has that final say on transfers. What is interesting in the dynamic, and the dynamic has changed on transfers, is that they've got the former chief scout from Borussia Dortmund, Sven Mislintat, as their head of recruitment. And surprise, surprise, his kind of first, major hits are with former Dortmund players who he's got a connection with, Aubameyang and Mkhitaryan. And so, but there's no way that you'll convince me that Wenger wouldn't have given the green light to those players. What is interesting to me is that he definitely wanted Mkhitaryan. He wanted him 2 years ago. He absolutely loves the player. What is interesting is that Aubameyang is so not a typical Wenger signing, in that basically he'll be 29 this summer. He's got a bit of a bad boy reputation and he's expensive, no matter what he says about being a bargain, proving to be a bargain in the Sunday papers. And I just think that in years gone by, Wenger would have said, no, we can't do that one. That's not common sense, particularly as we've got Lacazette, don't want to block him. What has changed, in my view, is that it's no longer him feeling that complete responsibility if a signing goes wrong. So he's waved it through and said, yes, I'll have that because I like Aubameyang. And he loves Aubameyang. And I think it's got every chance of being a different team, a new generation. He's built about 5 or 6 new different teams at Arsenal. The one thing he hasn't done is strengthened the defence, and I think that will come back to bite him this season, and it will be their undoing, because you can't go through the rest of the seasons with an attitude saying we'll concede 4 but we'll score 5. You know, you're going to get undone.
Sure. But the performance, it was exhilarating yesterday at the Emirates, John. Is Crossy was impressed with the man of it, particularly after the defeat and the way that they lost against Swansea at Liberty Stadium earlier on in the week. But can these players, will they really make the difference to the culture of the club and the environment?
Well, I mean, I was at the Palace game a couple of weeks ago when it was a very similar story. They went 4-0 up very quickly, and it's almost as if Arsenal can play better when they don't have to think too much. Once they think too much, they start getting kind of neuroses and angst, and it all goes wrong for them. I still feel as though they're short in areas of the team that weren't strengthened during January. I mean, I don't really understand why they didn't sign a defensive midfielder, because in those big games against big clubs, big European games, you need someone who's literally just going to sit in front of the defence. I don't. In really big games, you need 2, and arguably with Wilshere and Xhaka, and both kind of wanting to play a lot further forward, you've got none. And there's kind of a last days feel about Arsenal at the moment. It's like, one of those
for this group of players, or for the manager, you mean?
For the club as a whole. I think it's like one of these totalitarian dictatorships that's slowly transitioning to democracy. And you've got there's kind of a Soviet Union 1987 feel about it. And so that's, I think, contributing to a lot of the inconsistency and the volatility, because people are just kind of jockeying for position. Nobody really knows where they're going to be in 6 months, let alone 12 or 18 months.
Your thoughts on... I know we've been here before, Sam. Please don't look at me like that. I need help.
I think everything points, doesn't it, towards the change of the manager. I mean, in any other club, if you had a new chief scout, a new sporting director, who I think starts this week,
He started February the 1st.
February the 1st,
yeah.
Raul Sanllehi.
Yeah.
A new guy who's Farmy, who came in last summer, who's in charge of the contracts. All that would suggest it leading to one thing. I mean, if you want to make profound change at a football club, then you change the manager, don't you? So it seems to me that we'll look back and we'll see all these as signs. And yes, I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if Wenger goes in the summer. One thing that interested me, and I know Crossy picked up on this at London Colney, was Wenger was asked about Alex Song. He's been sort of posting a few pictures from the training ground. And he's been in a long tradition of Arsenal players who are allowed to come back to regain their fitness at the training ground. And Wenger was asked, you do actually need a defensive midfielder. He's 30 years old, he's out of contract. Is there any chance? Wenger was like, absolutely no chance. He's not. No, we're not going to.
Yeah, signs a new 2-year contract tomorrow.
Yeah, wait. I mean, Crossy's more dubious about this, but I just felt it just smelt of. There's your new defensive midfielder.
Well, he did go on to say, though, Sam, didn't he? He basically made the very kind of direct point that he was training in the afternoons after the rest of the first team had gone home.
Then how did he get that picture of Jack Wilshere the other day?
I just don't know. It's amazing. Honestly, Alex Song, I think, didn't part on the best terms. I'm amazed that once again.
That's incredible, isn't it? Why does he come back?
It's ridiculous. I mean, Flamini had a similar situation. Flamini actually came back and had a really good second spell, but didn't part on the best terms because he ran down his contract. Alex Song kind of, push remove, it wasn't about a happy departure at all, and Arsenal willingly sold the player, and now he's come back. Welcome to Arsenal Social Club at London Colney. I don't think it's very good. It doesn't send out a very good message. Yet Wenger being Wenger, after the press conference yesterday, he saw Jeremy Aliadier, his former player, who's
he's not coming back as well.
He's not coming back. Don't worry, he's not training at Colney. But it's just that you see a connection with Wenger and his former players.
It's unbreakable, isn't it?
It's unbelievable. It's fantastic, and I love it. And basically, he was asking Aliadier about his mum and dad, and sort of saying what about life and what about this, and he treats them as if they're. Well, he treats them... Yeah, absolutely. And I respect that so much. And for him to forgive and forget about sort of Alex Song, is a great thing. Alex Song went from being a sort of a squad player and one of Wenger's most unlikely finds to being kind of, sort of...
He went to Barcelona.
Went to Barcelona, walking through mix zones with the most outrageous outfits and taking sort of mobile phones to a whole new level. There was this incredible sort of, he wore this satchel once, and it was a mock mobile phone. So the phone rings as he's walking through the mix zone. He's picked up this giant mobile phone, and he goes, hello? And it's like, you're thinking, what are you doing? And the whole thing
thinks he's Dom Jolly.
It was remarkable.
Crossy's been trying to get one ever since.
I've never seen an outfit like it, and you think, I think you might have slightly lost the plot here, Alex, and it's bizarre. But anyway, he's welcome. We're veering off the point here.
Well, Alex Song has never ever been mentioned on the Sunday Supplement. He's just had a whole part dedicated to him.
Well, it is a remarkable return, and I just don't. I mean, I cannot see that one happening. But he's been welcomed back with open arms at Colney, which is a great sort of tribute to.
Can we talk about some of the current? Let's talk about some of the current ones, John, if we can.
Sorry.
Where does this leave Lacazette? Big signing in the summer, of course. Just looks like he's lost confidence. And then this man, Aubameyang, comes in, scores yesterday on his debut for Arsenal.
Yeah, well, it doesn't look good for him. He's done all right this season, but again, the thing about Arsenal, everybody kind of wants to play in that central area. I mean, that's where Sanchez ultimately wanted to play. That's obviously where Aubameyang is going to want to play. He's not going to be happy if he's shunted out on the left wing, because he will just kind of drift in. And I think there was a really good analysis by Danny Higginbottom actually on Sky News a few days ago about trying to get all these attacking players in the side. Can you get Ozil, Mkhitaryan, Lacazette, Aubameyang? Where does Ramsey fit into all this? Can you get Wilshere in this? And you can't really. You can't without leaving yourself hopelessly open at the back and hopelessly vulnerable to the counter-attack. That doesn't mean he won't do it, but knowing Wenger, but it does seem as though they've got a real problem balancing that side now.
Yeah. Crossy mentioned the Ozil signing his new contract. Sam, was that a big statement as well for Arsenal this week? Was that an important sign? Is it an important re-signing?
It was a big contract, that's for sure. There's been I did feel slightly uncomfortable with this notion that Arsenal fans should be incredibly grateful that someone's agreed to sign what's reported to be a £350,000 a week contract. I mean, Ozil's a lovely, silky footballer, but I think when we get to the stage where clubs are sort of yes, I will use that word again, saying we should, it's great that he stayed. We should be grateful. I don't quite see that. I think he's a wonderful player, but I think the very fact that Wenger said to him, "I now want him to be our leader." On Friday, our technical leader on Friday. I thought, well, shouldn't he be that already? He is now, with Sanchez gone, your star player. I think him and his agent have played a blinder, haven't they? They've obviously they've seen how the pieces are going to fall. They've got Arsenal into a position where they felt that they couldn't lose him, and so the price has gone up and up and up. Wenger says it was our cheapest option. He said to replace him with the transfer fee on top would have been more expensive. But even he sort of took a bit of a deep breath, I felt, on Friday, and felt that is a lot of money. So let's see what he does. He should be coming into his prime now, so I expect there'll be a lot demanded of him.
Yeah, lots of selfies yesterday in the mix zone. Rihanna and Mesut Ozil. Crossy, do you have one?
Unfortunately, I didn't see her.
I didn't. She was at the game.
No, I was there. I was stuck with Arsene Wenger's post-match thoughts.
Did you? OK,
yes.
Fair enough. Good stuff. OK, we're going to talk about Jose Mourinho's post-match thoughts next. That's after Manchester United beat Huddersfield yesterday. Very, very critical of the silence at Old Trafford. More on that next. Welcome back. With us this morning, the impressionist Sam Wallace. Jonathan Liew and John Cross. Let's just remind you what's in the papers this morning. Back of the Sun, you're a joke, Pep. This is Gary Neville, former Manchester United player, criticising Pep Guardiola for naming 6 substitutes on the bench yesterday for City's 1-1 draw at Turf Moor. Remarkable story on the back of the Express this morning. Antonio Conte will be sacked if Chelsea lose at Watford, Vicarage Road tomorrow night. Sam was at Old Trafford yesterday, back page of the Sunday Mirror. Sir Bobby's Munich letter, a poignant letter, which he wrote to supporters, fans and officials of the club yesterday. That was before Manchester United's 2-0 victory over Huddersfield. Of course, it is the 60th anniversary of the Munich air disaster. Sam did see Alexis Sanchez get off the mark. He scored yesterday. His penalty saved, but he did tap it in at Old Trafford. And then the front page of the Sunday Times, hidden away, really. Jose slamming quiet United fans. Big story yesterday because Paul Pogba was dropped after his performance the 63-minute performance he had against Tottenham at Wembley in midweek. But you feel the bigger story here, Sam, is Mourinho getting tucked into Manchester United fans again.
Yes, and it's quite interesting the way in which he did it. It was sort of a throwaway remark about a quiet stadium, to which Neil Custis brought him back to. And so, what do you mean by a quiet stadium? And he said, well, exactly that. It's not a noisy stadium. And then, apropos of nothing, he said it's not like Portsmouth, which Fratton Park seems to have stuck in his memory. I think that would have been from his first time at Chelsea. And I think probably viewing it through, if we can try and see it through the eyes of someone coming to the English game from overseas, I think there is an expectation that English football has this reputation for being very raucous and noisy
like
and loud. And that's the perception that people are fed. And actually, the reality, as we know, a lot of big stadiums is very, very different.
Just go to the Emirates,
The Emirates, and it's hard to disagree with him about Old Trafford. And I think a lot of United fans would agree with him that that it does lack an atmosphere, and it's the sort of thing that it's okay for away fans to sing about. You know, it's like a library or whatever. But it's a bit of a taboo for a manager to say it. And Mourinho's got a record for doing this. He did it at Chelsea a lot. I mean, I was just reading an old report from November 2014, a QPR home game at Stamford Bridge, and he said it's like playing in an empty stadium. He's not afraid to call fans out. Now,
it was his son, little Jose Jr. on Instagram. Remember that?
Was that right? He did it as well. Well, I think the fans might have a view about the kind of football Manchester United play. I mean, they were good. They were quite good to watch yesterday, and also maybe then it all feeds into the prices that they're obliged to pay to go to watch games as well. But it really does upset some supporters, because obviously it gives ammunition to their rivals and I'm afraid that he's right. He was right about Old Trafford yesterday. It was very quiet, and maybe it's a chicken egg. Maybe the team's form has precipitated that, but there's no doubt that taken in isolation, he was right about that.
But why did he go for it yesterday, John? He's had a bad week with the defeat and the manner of the defeat against Tottenham at Wembley. He drops Paul Pogba. It's a big statement to go and do that. An £89 million footballer that United brought back to Old Trafford. Why didn't he just... In the past, if they'd have lost the game, it would have been, it's the classic Mourinho diversionary tactic, and he always does. He's so clever and he's so intelligent. But they won yesterday, let's face it, a routine Manchester United victory over Huddersfield. Why choose now to be critical of Manchester United fans?
I don't think he can help himself. He's just...
as simple as that.
I mean, I think one thing we've learned about Mourinho over the years, he is just a terrible snide. And he loves having a little pop at people, whether it's his own fans. And, you know, he's built up enough credit with the fans over the last couple of seasons that they will probably take this. You know, it's not the first time he's done it. It's not the first time he's done it this season. Talked about how quiet the fans were. But I suppose another manager might say, well, maybe the onus is on me to get my team playing the sort of football that is going to get the fans on their feet, rather than simply just kicking out after quite a routine 2-0 win.
Right now, Crossy?
What I'm surprised about yesterday is, I mean, there's a great story in the back of the Sunday Mirror this morning about sort of Bobby Charlton's sort of emotional letter and Munich, and it was a tribute to Munich. I mean, when you look back upon the Munich tragedy, it's just English football. I mean, the disaster that happened with the Munich air crash will never ever be forgotten. And I thought that the way Old Trafford yesterday marked it with the fans, with banners, and incredibly poignant as I saw it, a minute's silence. It felt to me as if there should be, and rightfully so, despite obviously being an important game for United, something of a sombre mood. And I felt that basically Mourinho picking up on this point yesterday bordered on, really, I thought,
this could be an explanation.
Yeah, and I felt that it was a really strange piece of timing, I felt. Mourinho annoys me when he goes for the fans and that, with being quiet and so on. And in fact, actually, a Chelsea mate of mine did text me last night when he'd sort of seen the quotes about it and said, you know, how much it annoyed him. Do you know how much we pay, sort of thing, and kind of get into him really. And I can understand and sympathise with that view, because they do pay an awful lot of money, and it is a two-way street. And Jose, if you're continually having to do this, is this not telling you something about your style of football and the way that you should perhaps take a bit more responsibility in turning the fans on and getting them out of their seats, getting them excited? I know rival fans will go to Old Trafford and sing it's a ground full of tourists and all that, and you've got to kind of, you know, sort of, I guess, take it away that
We'll
it's
race
the
you
most...
back to London, yeah.
Well, it's kind of, we always have those digs, but hang on a minute, Old Trafford isn't just like that, and the sort of the cliche that brings, because I think that basically it's a passionate ground, isn't it, Sam? And there's lots of Manchester fans.
It can be some great nights, but I think
the
Munich thing, I get what you're saying about the sombre mood, but I don't think most United fans would want a quiet day at Old Trafford because it's the Munich anniversary. For example, when the whistle blows on that minute's silence, the roar that comes, really emotional, and then the songs come. So United, they still have lots. They still sing about Matt Busby, and they still sing, you know, and they about playing football the Matt Busby way. So I think there are ways. I don't think naturally a football crowd honours people in silence for 90 minutes. It tends to honour people with song and with noise after the minute silence.
To the modern players, Sam, 60 years on, do they have a depth of understanding and appreciation of the tragedy? Mourinho has, because he's spoken about it and its importance and its significance to himself and clearly to Manchester United and their worldwide support. But do the current players have an understanding?
I don't know, and I know that on the 50th.
Should they? Yeah.
On the, yes, I think if you're lucky enough to be one of the few people who play professional football for Manchester United, then surely you'd be curious about this. It informs so much of the club's history. There's the Munich tunnel along the South Stand tells the history of it. I remember on the 50th anniversary 10 years ago that Charlton did speak to the players, and obviously that was in the era of Rooney and Ronaldo, and there was and Rooney, actually, Wayne Rooney gave a really good interview about talking to Bobby Charlton, and he really seemed to get it. One thing I would say
was that the City United game when
United wore the retro kit and actually lost to City, but the other thing the club did was they gave and United, you know, given that they do like to max out their commercial value on all things, this was quite rare for them. They gave everyone a programme with a book explaining the history of the team before the tragedy and then what happened afterwards. And there was actually a really nice letter from Ed Woodward in there explaining why it was so important, inviting all the supporters to the service on Tuesday, which is the exact anniversary of the tragedy. And I actually think they did a pretty good job of saying to their fans, look, we think this is really important. We know that, you know, 98% of you know exactly what we're talking about. And that's obviously, the Busby Babes are sacred to United. They are at the very heart of what it means to play for Manchester United, about the club's attitude towards youth, about coming back from a terrible disaster. I happen to think it's the greatest story in British sport. I don't think there is anything that gets, well, not anything that gets close to it, but to me it's the most emotive and the most incredible story. And it was the thing that always strikes me is the interesting thing. I mean, you read many things about Munich, but they were in a position where they could barely fulfil their fixtures afterwards because they'd lost. Well, they ended up losing, I think, 9 players, and the only 2 teams that offered them to. I hope I'm going to get this right, but I'm pretty sure the only 2 teams that offered to lend them players were Nottingham Forest and Liverpool, which is amazing when you think of the enmity between the 2 teams. And obviously, Manchester City gave them their stadium after the war when Old Trafford had been damaged. So I think sometimes we lose. You know, those parts of history are really important to understand. That actually, although the modern rivalries are pretty toxic, there were some great things done between those big clubs in the past.
I'm sure Manchester United fans and those who are there, you say, we appreciate what you've just said about the reflections on the Munich air disaster, the 60th anniversary yesterday. Just want to move back to the game yesterday and Pogba being named substitute by Mourinho. We have to accept. Does he have to accept this as a direct reflection of his performance just on Wednesday night against Tottenham at Wembley?
Well, Mourinho said he wasn't meaning to punish anyone. But I mean,
however,
I mean, Pogba clearly played the part. He wasn't great against at Wembley. Nor was Smalling. Nor was Jones. I mean, nor was Ashley Young, for example. But it does mean it is a statement, whether he likes it or not. If you're leaving out your club record signing it's a big statement. But he merited it on the basis that you can't play, as we saw at Wembley, you can't play Pogba as a 2 in front of midfield, in front of the defence. It's not a system they can play. So where they fit Pogba and Sanchez and all these other attacking players into the same side, again, they've got an issue there.
Absolutely. OK, let's move on to Chelsea. I want to talk about Antonio Conte's future. Back page of the Express this morning. This is a remarkable story. Neil Fizdler saying Conte faces the sack if Chelsea lose against Watford tomorrow. They've got a huge Champions League game coming up, of course. He is at odds, and as we know, he's at war with the Chelsea board. I don't think anyone, even at Chelsea, would dispute that, particularly over the transfers and negotiations and the ins and outs of that club. But will Conte be sacked if they lose at Watford? Well,
Neil Fizdler says so, and has really put his sort of neck on the line with that, because I do feel that at the moment Conte is treading a dangerous fine line, isn't he? With everything that he says, with every outburst, he is further antagonising the hierarchy at Stamford Bridge. Just when you think he's basically said too much, he can't help himself.
He's not reining in, is he?
No, and I felt that it was amazing what he said after losing at home to Bournemouth, which was basically saying, I'm overachieving as Chelsea manager, and we're in a fight for top 4. Forget anything else, we're in a fight for top 4, which is not what the Chelsea board, let alone the fans, want to hear. He's putting himself in direct line. He will not resign. I think the likelihood is it will go at the end of the season, whether they lose at Watford or not, simply because in the background they've still got the FA Cup, and probably more importantly, they've got a last 16 tie with Barcelona in the Champions League. While he's got that to lean on, I still think his position is safe. They are still in the top 4. I would say that of the current existing members of the top 4, they are by far and away the most vulnerable because they are not playing particularly well. I looked at his histrionics. I'd covered the FA Cup game with Newcastle. It seems to me that he's lost that passion and enthusiasm on the touchline that he had last season. You're no longer getting those histrionics that drove the team on last season. I wonder whether that is simply because he knows that he's going to go. And the club will ultimately, I think, push him in the summer because he's just not working. He's not happy. He's very combative, isn't he? He's very confrontational with his style and everything that he says. I mean, the Mail on Sunday have led on him and his latest outburst, putting him on collision course again. And it didn't seem the most outrageous thing that he said to the Sunday newspapers by recent standards at all. I feel
it was enough to fashion a back page.
Absolutely. I feel like he's dead man walking, but I don't feel that it will be ultimately judged on the game against Watford on Monday night.
Just quickly, Sam, are Chelsea, are they tiring of him?
Yeah, I think they are. I mean,
because last season he was the most popular manager in the Premier League. Everyone loved Antonio Conte. The media, the supporters.
He wants to be sacked, doesn't he? I feel he wants. Or there'll be. I can almost imagine it now. The mutual consent. Off he goes, and it's some great jobs going this summer. Potentially Real Madrid, potentially Bayern Munich, potentially PSG, and I think he feels one of those who's got his name on it.
Yeah, sure. OK, good stuff, guys. Next up, we're going to talk West Ham, their transfer dealings, and Tony Henry. More on him coming next. OK, we're going to talk West Ham now. Their fans not happy. They lost again yesterday, this time at Brighton, should I say? I was going to say Bournemouth then. But I want to get on to their transfer dealings, John, and Tony Henry, who's the club's transfer advisor, suspended and eventually dismissed this week by West Ham over a series of emails and telephone conversations and exchanges with Matt Lawton at the Daily Mail. Your thoughts on the content of Tony Henry's emails and the way that he addressed and spoke about African footballers that had been offered to West Ham. Did he cross the line? At what point did he cross the line? And was it inappropriate?
Yeah, well, I suppose if we try a little thought exercise here and kind of spin it around and say he's not talking about African footballers but European footballers, and he says something like, well, European footballers are kind of, well, they're very disruptive, aren't they? And they cause absolute chaos. And you would quite rightly say, well, that's ridiculous. How can you group players from Greece and Iceland and Poland and Portugal under the same bracket? And that's the kind of intellectual stupidity we're talking about. It quite apart from the dubious prejudice of it all, the fact that you can just talk about African players as if their primary asset or their primary trait is where the continent they happen to have been born on. And I think, you know, you've got to fire them for stupidity as much as anything else.
Mm. We've seen this before with, say, Malcolm Mackay and Ian Moody, where the defence mechanism is, well, it was a private conversation. Is that relevant? The emails exchanged have the private and confidentiality clause contained within it. Does that have any relevance at all?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not irrelevant, and I suppose it'd be relevant to any kind of disciplinary procedure that happened. And I suppose a court of law would also take that into account. Morally speaking, I'm not sure it does, because the fact that, I mean, it's not a private thought that he's expressed. It's in an email to somebody who he possibly doesn't even know that well. The fact that he has felt emboldened to voice these kind of views, and clearly the fact that he says, you know, oh, it's not racist. Oh, I'm not calling, you know, means he clearly thinks they're okay on some level, and that's the really worrying thing. And it is kind of depressing that in 2018 we're still having to explain that to people. Do
you think it was racist, or his argument maybe? I don't know if his argument would be inappropriate, but where is the line? At what point does he cross the line, John?
Well, I think he probably crossed the line when he said that African players cause mayhem when they're not in the side.
Yeah.
I just, I mean, the mind boggles a little bit. I think that it's so far over the line, and yet, you know, probably a lot of people privately will hold those views. Maybe even people watching this show might think, well, you know, what's the big fuss? But I'm afraid it is a big fuss. Yeah,
it's unacceptable. That was my next question, is that sort of behaviour, those sort of remarks, in your experience, Crossy, or do you think that it is prevalent in the game?
I do think it's prevalent in the game, from a point of view.
Those kind of casual, off-the-cuff, dismissive remarks, I would say.
Where I think it comes into play, and by the way, I think once Tony Henry has addressed those things in an email and then also repeated it in a phone conversation, you know, which has been taped as an interview, that West Ham had absolutely no option. You can't accept that. Sure. So I'm not in any way condoning it. But where I think that the view, then you could sort of almost flip it, is that, for example, Newcastle, if you remember that, when you know, sort of in the sort of Graham Carr era, when he was sort of kind of raiding France, that we reached a point where everyone was saying, well, Newcastle got too many French players, and no one at all questioned that attitude, that train of thought.
What, the idea that there was a French clique
there was a French
Newcastle
clique.
dressing room? Okay.
And there's various, I think, other clubs whereby at dinner, for example, in the dining hall, you might have a clique of French players there and kind of English lads there, and is it disruptive? Should you move them together? And I think that obviously, it was the point that Tony Henry was trying to make, wasn't he? I think, in that sort of phone interview that was taped. But to completely categorise, I think, African players as, once you have too many of them, as I think the phrase was used, that basically they would be disruptive, is just offensive and obviously completely inappropriate and completely wrong, in my view. It's absolutely ridiculous. The player we're talking about, you know, has been referred to since he's from Lille, isn't he? And I think he's was a target, I think, for West Ham and for Crystal Palace. Neither ended up doing the deal, and you do begin to wonder, sort of, obviously, why that's happened, on what basis. And the other sort of prevalent thing in the phone conversation was Tony Henry saying, well, ultimately, he's not good enough. He's virtually kicked off the conversation by saying that he's not good enough. And then I guess he's gone on to reason why. Crystal Palace have clearly had a look and then ended up not doing the deal. And this is a player who was obviously desperate to come across. Palace couldn't get it done, and then ultimately it doesn't work out with West Ham either. And, you know, quite how the story came about is obviously, it would be interesting to know. But basically, ultimately, Tony Henry acted completely inappropriately, and that there are views completely out of kilter, as David Moyes rightly pointed out on Friday. Leaves David Moyes in such a difficult position because the team is struggling, they're not playing at all well, And the fans are not angry with David Moyes, who I think has done a very good job, actually, in turning things around and done well. The fans are angry with the ownership, and the fans are angry with everything that the owners are doing at the moment, whether it be their transfer dealings, whether it be sort of losing at Wigan, and then a few fans then sort of obviously congregate around David Sullivan as he's leaving the ground. It's a very, very unhappy place at the moment, West Ham. This really piles on the talk of a crisis, the talk of, you know, bad times at the London Stadium. And I do think from here on in, David Moyes will be well aware that amid all of the bad atmosphere at the moment within the club for various reasons, he's in one hell of a relegation fight, and this crisis on the back of Tony Henry has only deepened his problems, and that story will be an absolute nightmare for him.
3 points off the drop at the moment, West Ham after that defeat yesterday against Brighton. Why can't David Sullivan, David Gold, Karen Brady, why can't they get it right in terms of the relationship with their supporters? Why are they so unpopular, Sam? What is it? Does it go back to moving from Upton Park to London Stadium? It can't. I would like to say, is it any deeper? But it can't go much deeper than moving from your traditional spiritual home.
I think when a club makes mistake after mistake, I think it ceases to become a coincidence. If we take all those things, try to take some of them in isolation. The stadium move was. It's so important that a club gets that right when you're wrenching your supporter base away from their spiritual home of, 100 years.
Who's got that right over the years?
Well, true, and I just don't think that. I think if you're going to do it, you've got to do it well. I mean, they won't like me saying this, but the way that Arsenal did it, for example, when they moved to the Emirates. I mean, the Emirates has not been a great success. I mean, they've never won a trophy there, such as a league title there. One that, the FA Cup's a Wembley trophy, isn't it? But they did handle that transition. The kind of final season at Highbury was remarkable, wasn't it? Every single home game had a different theme. West Ham did do the big send-off on the last day, but what was the real problem was when they got there and they had people in the wrong places. They had fans fighting among themselves, didn't they? And it just felt from the start, the West Ham fans said this wasn't what we were sold. And then I think Sullivan recently has said that it actually only, I can't remember the figure that he put on it, but it was modest. It only makes us another, for example, £10 million a year. And the fans were like, well, why have we left then? Because this was supposed to be the game changer. And it has changed the game. It's made it worse. And then you move to the other side, which is the sporting element of it. I think they stuck too long with Bilic, but others might say, well, at least they showed a bit of consistency. Quite apart from his racial stereotyping, I don't think the transfer policy that Tony Henry has overseen has been particularly effective either. So there are a lot of elements to it, and the proof is in the pudding, really. The fans have been moved to a new stadium, and they don't like it. They don't like the team, and I think they've got to manage. They're in another relegation battle, and you're right. They don't seem to have been able to. They tell us all the time that they're West Ham fans and they love the club, but there's a bit more to it than that.
It's not ridiculous to argue that West Ham are the worst run club in the Premier League. Now that Sunderland have kind of vacated the building, there's an old saying about, in political journalism, that voters will forgive a government that makes unpopular decisions, but they won't forgive a government that is basically incompetent. And I think West Ham fans are at that point. They don't believe that their owners are in the least bit competent, and once you've broken that thread of trust, it's very hard to get it back.
I agree with you. I don't think they're fit for purpose at all.
On the upside? There isn't one, is there?
They're still in the Premier League.
They're still in just about 3 points off the drop yesterday after that defeat at Brighton. OK, we're going to move on. We're going to talk about Liverpool and Tottenham next. Daniel Sturridge is no longer Liverpool player. He's at West Brom. Why did he move to the Hawthorns? More on him next. Crossy loves Daniel Sturridge so much he calls him Studger. Let's talk about Studger then, shall we?
I really do like him. Well, I love him. No, I'll go that far. I just thought...
OK, why is he... OK.
Well, I think he's a brilliant player.
OK.
I think he's technically absolutely fantastic. I think he's a great finisher.
OK.
Some of his stuff that
he did... Why has he gone to West Brom, then?
Well, I actually think he's gone to West Brom over Newcastle because a couple of reasons. I think traditionally, I think his family sort of heritage is from there, isn't he? And so I think, obviously, it's gone there. But I think it's a bigger reason. I think it's a reason whereby I think they've sort of maybe sold him the football. I think Pardew probably...
They're bottom of the table.
Well, I was going to come on to that.
Sorry.
Simply by saying that I thought it took real guts. Everyone questions his mental strength and his attitude. And that it must be so frustrating for Sturridge to hear that and sometimes not be able to answer it. But I feel that he has answered it on this occasion by simply saying, I've got it so good at Liverpool, I could be part of the team, although he hasn't obviously been involved recently, and that's obviously pushed him out the door, you would suggest. But I think if they'd kept him, then basically I'm sure that he would have been involved somewhere down the line. But I feel that to swap Liverpool for bottom of the table, to put his reputation on the line, to go and play, to play regularly, to try and get West Brom out of danger. Yesterday's result was devastating for the club. To do it with the intention, I think, and the focus of getting back into the England squad and trying to get back on course to get back into the World Cup squad, I think deserves great credit for Sturridge. And the questioning of his attitude, I think there should be replied with that. I still think that he's going to struggle to get in the World Cup squad, simply because I think Gareth Southgate has been quite ruthless and brutal with players. He's taken a view on them if they're not playing, if they're not doing enough. So he's had to go and say, look, I need to go and play, I need to go and shine. And there were certain things in the game yesterday which really impressed. Some of his movement and his skill, and his turns and his touches were absolutely outstanding. And
so you're a fan, basically, aren't you?
I am, and I still think that there could be a place for him. I love technical players and I like skillful players, and he's that player. And I still think that there could be a place for him in the World Cup squad.
Pep Guardiola would love you, Crossy, wouldn't he?
Yeah, I like Pep Guardiola.
Should he have made that move to West Brom, though?
It's a strange one, especially when you consider that there was also interest from Sevilla, apparently, earlier in the window, into Milan, and Newcastle. I mean, the pull of his family in the Midlands has clearly had a big effect on him. But for footballing reasons, I suppose the fact that Pardew has talked about wanting to play two strikers, and obviously, as we saw in that season with Liverpool, that he does play best when he's got somebody kind of doing the hard yards next to him, whether it's Suarez or Jay Rodriguez or whatever. But I think it's a strange one as well, because he's not going to get a lot of the ball. He's going to have to do a lot of thankless, tireless running, the sort that, in fact, as it happens, is not great for a player with a long history of chronic injury problems. So he's going to have to do a lot of, basically a lot of hard work. He's going to have to do a lot of, chasing down channels, chasing down lost causes. And I think the next few months will actually learn quite a bit more about what he's made of mentally.
Yeah, sure. Let's talk about players who will be playing for Liverpool and the significance of the fixture this afternoon, Sam, between Liverpool and Tottenham at Anfield. You've written your column on the two managers because, of course, they're two of the most popular managers in the Premier League, probably for slightly differing reasons. I guess Klopp's also done an interview with Ollie Holt in the Mail on Sunday this morning, which is a must-read as well. But what are your thoughts on the respective managers and the significance of this fixture? What is the significance of this fixture this afternoon?
Well, there's a couple of things that strike me about them. I mean, neither of them won a trophy in English football. Obviously, Klopp's won 3 major trophies in Germany. And that tends to get thrown back at them a lot. And we're used to living or judging our football managers by the greats. And that those two have both got the great manager at Liverpool, Bill Shankly, and Bill Nicholson. Bill Nicholson used to say, if you haven't won a trophy, you've had a bad season. Can we still apply those rules to these managers? Now, most people say, well, that's terrible. Of course, you have to win trophies. That's what football is all about. And I understand that. But what I'm saying is, what's the equivalence here? Is getting in the top 4, as Wenger always used to tell us, was a trophy in itself. For two clubs that don't spend as much as City, United, Chelsea, and possibly now Arsenal as well. I mean, Jurgen Klopp is in the black in terms of his spending. The Coutinho sale has wiped out all his net spend. So how do we judge these two managers? Because they play really good football, both those teams. This will be a very good game today.
Who judges them on the trophies, Sam? Because in terms of the football they play, Liverpool is exhilarating. But Tottenham Wednesday night.
But it always comes back to that, doesn't it? It always comes back to that. And then I look at the two managers in both clubs' histories to have won the last trophies. Well, Juan Ramos, 2008 League Cup. I mean, there's no statue to Juan Ramos at the new White Hart Lane. And Kenny Dalglish, who's obviously beloved of Liverpool, 2012 League Cup. But it didn't didn't keep him in a job.
No.
So what are we actually after from our managers? And the conclusion I would draw is that these two, I couldn't think of two better managers to manage these two clubs. They're the kind of managers you would want at your clubs. They're very modern. They play good football, but if you put them up against what Mourinho's done in his first season at United, he won 2 trophies. Yet United fans, exactly, they don't really seem happy with him a lot of the time. So I was just sort of chewing on this conundrum really in the column. I don't know if I've made any dauntingly sort of insightful conclusions, but
I don't know. The producer of this programme, so he loved it this morning. It's one of the first things he said to me.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. But yeah, I think I think that both of them. The other thing that I would say, which both of them are very respectful, if that's the right word, of their club's hierarchy. So Pochettino, there's been a few little things recently, but him and Daniel Levy are best friends. They go kayaking together in Argentina, and Klopp never ever criticises Fenway. You know, he even over the sale of his best player, to the extent that some Liverpool fans feel that he should, and so they are. By that token, they are the kind of managers that clubs love because they get out there. They're not like Conte, who is very critical of Chelsea, but he's won a league title. So it's a difficult dynamic because sometimes fans like the manager to call out the ownership. They like them to be critical, but obviously the owners themselves don't want that from their managers.
No, the idea Pochettino's always got this. He's got to win a trophy. John, will we judge him ultimately by that, or will we judge him by nights like Wednesday night against Manchester United or Real Madrid, say, away and at home, of course, in the Champions League group phase?
Yeah, well, trophies are only one way of measuring the greatness of a side. You look back to that 13-14 season, do we remember Brendan Rodgers' Liverpool side more fondly, or Pellegrini's City side that actually won the title? History has a funny way of remembering teams, and I think Pochettino's side, whether or not they win the Carabao Cup or won a stage, and it's not going to seal his greatness. I agree with certain people say it's a stepping stone to greater things, and that kind of proves the point really that it is really only a stepping stone. Trophies are, I mean, look, Wenger, who's won 3 in 4 years, a fat lot of good it's done him at Arsenal.
Yeah.
So I think the landscape's slightly changing in that respect, where there are so many different measures of how a team is done, and ultimately it really comes down to bragging rights, this kind of trophy debate.
Who's your favourite team to watch in the Premier League? If you had a spare Saturday afternoon and you wanted to watch a Premier League fixture, where would you be happy to part with your money?
Burnley. I love watching Burnley. There's a kind of we're gonna lose.
It's fine, as long as you can justify it.
No one knew how to react there.
We're probably siphoning viewers at the rate of about. But I just find if you look at the way Burnley play without the ball, there's a choreography to them. Everybody's spaced right. Everybody knows their jobs. Everybody's somebody shifts over. The fullback moves up. The centre back shifts over. There's a kind of beauty to it, and I kind of like the way that they have a really clear idea of the way they want to play football, and they carry it out.
On that note, we've run out of time. Thanks very much for your contributions this morning, Sam Wallace, Jonathan Liew and John Cross. OK, don't forget you can catch up with the show on the podcast and on demand. We'll see you next week, the earlier time, at 9 o'clock. See you then.
Sky Sports Premier League. Feel it all.